At WFM Labs, our organization recognizes the importance of gaining market insights to compete effectively and provide better goods and services to our customers. However, exchanging price or commercially sensitive information with competitors can violate antitrust laws and harm competition. To avoid antitrust risk, it is essential to ensure that information exchanges in the WFM Labs community are reasonable and promote competition. This includes avoiding discussions or coordination of sensitive topics such as customer prices, pricing paid to vendors, compensation paid to employees, or proprietary information. If you would like more information, please refer to the guidelines outlined by the FTC and DOJ, Antitrust Guidelines for Collaborations Among Competitors. In addition, WFM Labs meetings are being recorded. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to be recorded. And finally, we ask that all participants review and comply with our code of conduct. Thank you.
Folks, my name is Jim Simmons. I am a co-founder of WFM Labs and founder of Qless Consulting. We're here today for a webcast I'm very excited about. It's one of our first where we're bringing in what I'll refer to as some heavy hitters within the WFM industry. We're very honored to have these folks. I myself have been in contact centers for longer than I'd care to admit, about over 25 years now. Spent most of that time in operations with a significant focus in workforce management. We've got what I would refer to as an esteemed panel today to help facilitate some discussion and a great guest and Dan. So I'm going to turn it over to Ted first to do a little introduction of himself.
Thanks, Jim. Excited as well for this session. I'm Ted Lango, founder of WFM Labs. I'm also Senior Vice President at Intradiem. Left the contact center side of the business about a year and a half ago to join Intradiem and really to help the community think about new ways in doing workforce management. 20 years on that side was enough for me. Excited to be here. Jim?
Awesome. And we also have Irina with us today, coming in from across the Atlantic, I believe. So she's up a little bit late. Thank you for joining us. Irina, you want to give us a little bit of background on yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jim. And thanks for having me. My name is Irina, and I've been a planner for the rest, I would say, close to 15 years now, and I'm an independent consultant. I have my own consulting company called WFM, and I'm a very passionate WFMer, so happy to be joining that discussion. Jim, back to you.
Thanks. So I mentioned today our guest of honors, Dan Smitley. He's going to be taking us through the balanced approach to WFM. Anybody who's been on LinkedIn for a minute or has been at SWPP or paying attention to WFM probably knows who Dan is. He spent 20 years in contact centers, 17 of those in workforce management. Dan is also recognized by ICMI as Workforce Manager of the Year 2020 and top 25 thought leaders to follow in 2024. Dan is also a former board member of SWPP, and we are very excited to have him take us through a better approach, hopefully, to workforce management. So Dan, I'm going to turn it over to you to kick us off.
Awesome. I appreciate the introduction. Thanks so much for having me. I agree. It's an esteemed panel. I'm honored to be on with y'all. This is fantastic. Thanks for joining, guys. Maybe what you didn't cover in kind of the overarching, accolades and awards is how focused I am on people. It is people-centric for me. Workforce management is all around the people. And I think as someone who loves spreadsheets like I do, and I think like a lot of us do, right? We probably cut our teeth on Excel. And for me, Excel moved me into a role and an opportunity to be able to lead people, to develop people, to invest in people. And that's honestly where I love to spend most of my time. I think maybe to kick us off and maybe just as a starting point, my perspective on workforce management is that a lot of it starts with trying to optimize the people, right? It comes from the 80s where we finally realized, oh, we have some insight into what volume will be coming. We have these contact centers that start having reliable volume and average handle time. And so we said, oh, we can align people with volume, and this is fantastic. And I think, unfortunately, too many organizations kind of stopped there. A lot of organizations are still focusing on optimization of staff and saying that is the primary, if not sole, purpose of workforce management. That we align resources, and we talk about them as resources, not people. We align resources to volume. And again, we talk about volume and not customers, not people. And for me, this is such a challenge. For me, this feels like it's falling short. So maybe it's just kind of a starting point for today's conversation is, for me, if is it insufficient, it is a plateau from the 80s, and it is falling short of what workforce management can be if all we're doing is aligning resources to volume. I think we need to step our game up, and I think we need to do more than just optimize our staff to volume.
No, that's a great point, and I like how you mentioned, because I think a lot of folks are nodding their head. Yep, Excel. I came in that route. Again, I've been around for quite a while. I had moved a little bit out of WFM myself, and probably spent about 10 years more on the ops side of things. And when I came back to WFM, one of the comments I made to my new manager was, I'm surprised how little has changed within the industry. So, a great comment. I think, Ted, tell us a little bit about your experience and where you stand on Dan's thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's refreshing to hear, and I feel like Dan has been out there championing this for a long time. I feel like people are finally starting to listen. And that'd be, I guess, one of my questions for you, Dan, is do you feel like it's starting to shift? I'm hearing more people talk about the employee, where I'm used to 20 years of them being more like factory workers, plug them in, optimize. Well, what are you hearing, and what are you seeing? Are you seeing like a positive movement in that direction where people are starting to think about balancing, or is it still window dressing and not really reality yet?
Yeah, I do think one of the positives, and it's a few, but one of the few things that came positively out of COVID and out of the pandemic was this conversation that had already started, but really was emphasized around work-life balance, around people centricity, about employee engagement. And I think the pandemic really kind of brought to light a lot of the challenges that people have. So I think the conversation has moved forward, yes. Unfortunately, I think in a lot of contact centers, we have just gotten accustomed to the model of butts and seats. We've gotten accustomed to high attrition rates. We've gotten accustomed to replaceable agents, and we're just going to focus on getting to the next customer, getting to the next call. I remember not too long ago, I was with an organization, and this was early in my career. I remember having conversations about how we could reduce the available time between outbound dials, between calls, from 1.5 seconds to 1 second. We're talking about millisecond differences, and it was about the optimization. That was back in early 2000s, maybe 2010 at the latest. And unfortunately, I still hear people talking about this. I still hear organizations focusing on how you're going to optimize staff, how are you going to get the most out of these people, how are you going to get the most out of these resources. I do have hope. I do see organizations out there that are caring about the employees, but I have concerns about them too. Like, I see a lot of startups focusing on the employee experience and giving them everything they want. And then 6 months down the line, I also see layoffs because we weren't optimizing for the business needs. So I would say it's a mixed bag, Ted. I do see some people seriously considering and looking at employee experience and trying to help solve for that. But sometimes I see an overcorrection that to where now we are overstaffed, allowing the agents to do almost whatever they want in the name of employee engagement. And it's leading to businesses that are having to cut those people because they just can't afford 40% occupancy. They can't afford 50% available time. So it's a mixed bag, I would say. It's harder than simply focusing on the employee. There's more to it.
No, that's a fair point for sure. And again, the context here is, how do you strike that balance? And as Ted mentioned, you've been out there advocating, and it's a pendulum that can tend to swing. Irina, I'm very interested on your perspective, right? I'm making some assumption here. You've been in a little bit less time than maybe myself or Ted, so maybe not quite as ingrained in some of the old school ways. And I'm thinking you probably have a little bit more of a global mindset. So, what are your thoughts on Dan's comments?
First of all, I think these are great comments. And listen, I'm not known for sugarcoating things, so I'm going to be as blunt as possible. I think that if the scale goes too much in one or the other direction, ultimately you're paying the price. If we focus too much on the customer, on the expense of the business, as Dan mentioned, we're going to be heading to layoffs. So ultimately, it's not going to be better for the employees. If we focus solely on the employees and the business go downs, we kind of head in the same direction. So for me, it's a very mature discussion and exercise into explaining to every single party how do we strike that balance and what are the consequences if we don't do that. But maybe for me, one of the most important points is that listen, the customer is a customer. They don't care what's happening within the organization, right? And it's not their job to know, but it's our job to explain to all of the parties involved how their actions or lack of actions or decisions are ultimately affecting everyone in the chain.
If I can follow up on that, Irina, I'd be curious. My exposure to WFM, my exposure to contact centers outside of the States is incredibly limited. And I know that's where most of your market is. In my American viewpoint, as ignorant as it is, I'll own it, right? I just see the EU as this wonderful place that cares about people, that allows them and gives them all sorts of breaks and just, right? I have this mindset of every other country in the EU taking 3-hour lunches in the middle of the day. I know that's not right, but there's something ingrained in my head. Talk to me about that. Like, is there an easier culture in the EU? Is there an easier culture to say, like, we need to invest in people and care for people? Or even in that kind of a context, in that kind of a culture, WFM is still focusing primarily on optimization, butts and seats. These are just, like, talk to me a little bit about kind of the EU perspective a bit more.
The challenge with EU is that we're very employee centric from a legal perspective. So there are all sorts of rules, requirements, and regulations. What can you do in terms of schedules, which is ultimately, in my experience, because I have worked all around the globe, it's making the life of planners much more difficult because you can only introduce so much flexibility into the schedules, right? So I would say there are a lot of challenges here. On the other hand, if we go to you guys from the States, I know that it's much more performance driven, where not necessarily everything is so employee centric. But I can see definitely there is a shift in the business where all across the board is starting to introduce a little bit more the human perspective and oh, we actually need to care about our people because, and that's one thing that I hate. We need to care about people because customers are people, our employees are people, everyone that works for the business is people. So I always say for my teams, whenever I'm working for a company, from a WFM perspective, the customers is everyone. It's not only the end customer of the business, but also the agents are my customers. I need to make the best for them as well. That's why it should be a balance.
Thank you. That's awesome.
All right. So you've kind of thrown a little bit of the gauntlet down, Dan, and said, hey, we gotta think about the agents first. And I completely agree. One of the challenges that I feel a lot of your colleagues have, I myself can respect this, I've had this conversation, is where and how do you find the balance? Certainly finance has a seat at the table. If you work at some contact centers, contractual obligations may have a seat at the table. Conversely, one of the things I've seen folks struggle with and taking that approach is if you go and ask for the voice of the agent to really make things better, a lot of times you get very conflicting voices. So one example is, whenever we did shift bids, I remember, we had a weighting of, your length of service and your performance. Obviously, people who were there longer felt like, putting any weight towards
Right.
performance wasn't good. So how do you balance that conversation now that we've gone through the concept with finance and the variety of opinions you get within the agent population?
Yeah, I think you have to be incredibly transparent upfront about what we're trying to accomplish, right? And own the flawed system that you're creating. I think workforce management, we do ourselves a disservice too often because we're so data driven. And again, going back to we love our spreadsheets, we love our numbers, and we're like, this is the fair and equitable way to do this. We a certain portion of performance and tenure and productivity and attendance, and we create these amazing dashboards, these amazing scorecards, and then we just basically shove it down people's throats and say, this is fair, just get over it. I think as workforce management, we can go out to the agent population and be like, listen, we're trying something new, shift bids. We think this could work. We think it's going to benefit the majority of people, but not everyone's going to love it. And if you're one of those people, we still want to hear from you. We still want to hear what's going on, why you're not happy with it, how we think you can improve this environment. And this is why we're doing what we're doing. I think WFM could really benefit from like campaigns, marketing campaigns internally, right? Like, how do we sell what we're trying to accomplish? How do we communicate before we implement it? Instead of trying to clean it up afterwards, being like, oh crap, we didn't even think about. Use your resources, use the finance, use your frontline employees, use the IT team, heck, use your own marketing team for the external emails to help you write your internal emails. Like, why aren't you leveraging those resources? So you're going to be challenged. And the reality is you're not going to get it perfect. I think owning the humanity of the WFM team with the agents up front to say, we're going to screw this up, but we're giving it a shot. We're going to get it wrong, but you're going to help us improve for the next time. Sets up the expectation that it's going to be wrong, but we're going to still try it. And I think that's an amazing thing to try to incorporate in your culture. And if that's what you can be known by in your organization, a team that experiments, the team that tries, and a team that's going to be innovative and yet fail and learn, I don't know if WFM can be better positioned in an organization. And I see that heart. I'll take that heart all day.
There you go.
Every
that's
time.
good. I love the idea of having the marketing team work with WFM. Ted, I'm going to throw it over to you because I know that you have talked a lot about how do we make that transition, right? How do we use data, right? Ted's our data guy. He goes through a lot and has really uncovered and peeled back some of the layers, not only on how workforce management, certainly that perception is there, right? They were always the stick. How do you change that? And what does it mean in the long term? And Ted, I'll ask you to speak a little bit because I think this is relevant, is as we think about the future of contact centers and WFM and AI. I know we talk a lot and I won't take us down that rabbit hole, but I will say, I think as we integrate AI and the job becomes more specific, more specialized, and more difficult, we have to be even more cognizant of the workforce, right? It's not a cattle call anymore. So Ted, how do you see arranging those conversations between finance and the ops leadership and making sure that we make this shift?
Yeah, I think, and I want to hear from Dan on like bite-sized bits of how you start this journey off of rebalancing. But my opinion, and I'd be curious, Dan, on your thoughts on this is, and this is not a new concept. Harvard Business Review did an article called The Service Profit Chain. I don't know, it's been probably 25 years ago. And the concept goes, I think, parallel to Dan, you thinking about rebalancing, but really is the order in which we think about priorities. And that service profit chain basically says, hey, if you start with your employees and you take care of them, they'll take care of your customers, and your customers at the end of the day will take care of your shareholders. Many of the corporations that I've been exposed to over my history of doing this really look at this in reverse. It's the shareholder, and then the customer, and then the employee last. But the service profit chain flips that around, and it doesn't say, well, the employee is more important than the customer or the shareholder, but yet says, if you just do it in this particular order, focus on employees. Your employees will take care of your customers, and your customers will take care of your shareholders. And I'm curious, Dan, because I read that years ago and just thought, hey, there's a logical correlation between, customer satisfaction and at the end of the day, profitability. I went backwards and said there's also a logical correlation between customer satisfaction and employee satisfaction. Reversed it, found those correlations, and thought if we would just start here, then we can really impact the organization as a whole by starting there. And my question, I guess, back to flip it back to you, Dan, on comments on that, are there small tactics that you found to be successful in going after if I've got a 1980s workforce practice,
Right.
traditional plan everything ahead of time, shift bids, the entire encyclopedia.
Sure.
Are there tactics that you found are good ones to go after first to try to do rebalancing, assuming that you're dealing with a company that is overbalanced or over-indexed in either shareholders or customers?
So I would say where I would start if I found myself in that environment, or if I was coaching someone in that environment, where I'd tell us to start is to slow down and lean into curiosity. I think workforce management, right? We love our numbers, we love our data, we do a great job of forecasting, and in that kind of 1890s, we feel confident about our numbers. And what I would suggest is we slow down and we start talking to the agents. We don't promise them everything, right? We don't say we can give you whatever you want, but we at least say what's going on, and what are the practices that are causing your friction and your frustration and your challenges. We want to be cautious, right? We want to partner with HR to make sure that we're not kind of diving too much about your personal home and what you got going on and what kind of accommodation, right? We need to be careful there, but there is a fine line there of the more information we know about people, the more that we can see them complexly, the better we're able to serve and support them. And so what I would suggest is go on a listening tour, right? The first thing to do, you come in, you're trying to make some sort of changes, is to go around saying, what is it that we need to do differently? How can we help your life, your community, your family? What could we do from the WFM side? And then to try to sell that to leadership that is so focused on the bottom line, so focused on the optimization. We have to be able to tie the caring of people to the business, right? We're going to have to go, and it's a hard one for them because there's a long tail there. There's a lot of, we know we will be paying immediately for higher shrinkage to give more PTO. We're going to be paying immediately for more headcount because we've slowed down our AHT. We're going to realize those costs immediately. We're not going to see those savings for months, maybe years, because our attrition is, and so it's going to be a challenge. And own that up front with your leadership to say, short-term investment, long-term gain. And that's how you need to communicate it in the same ROI. That's how your leadership is likely thinking. So first go on a listening tour, then try to position the changes around a long-term ROI, and connecting, caring for people is good business.
Yeah. Do you think it's clear to business leaders, and you hit it, is the correlation between attrition, that longer term ROI, and the short term tactics that may take a hit? I think it's clear, but
Right.
Building that case, I think, is real important as well, so they understand where the golden egg is at the end of the
Right.
day: lower attrition.
Well, then do I think it's clear? I think it philosophically makes sense to a lot of people, and it's financially hard for them to pull that trigger, right? Look at the amount of layoffs that are going on right now. We have not seen this much layoffs since 2020 during the pandemic. That we are, and why? And I think from at least the articles I'm reading, these layoffs are about cost effectiveness. They're about savings. They're about returning shareholder value. And it's coming down to the short-term gains, unfortunately. There's fewer and fewer organizations that are thinking long-term around investing in employees. So it is going to be a bit of a challenge, the environment we're in, once those short-term gains. I think it's attrition that is kind of the golden egg at the end, but I think it's even more complex than that. Okay, so we're fixing our attrition. That's amazing. We don't have to go after the cost of replacement, but then there is also less ramp up. And so we have, on average, higher productivity. If it's a sales organization, we have higher conversion rate because we're retaining some of that knowledge. We're also upping our game because we have the higher tenured people are able to reinvest in the lower, tenured agents. There is just so much compounding value by going after and keeping people in the organization. That is not just attrition. I think that's one of the easiest and most direct correlation. But it is a hard conversation to have with leadership because so much of our cultural focus is on these short-term gains happening right now. And we just are going to have to kind of help walk our leaders to a longer term vision around cost effectiveness of agents.
So I'm going to ask Irina, I know you work with a lot of companies, right? You've got your ear to the ground. What do you think is the biggest challenge that you're hearing as you talk to folks? So we talk about Dan's vision a little bit, but transformationally, what's the biggest hurdle, do you think?
Once again, I think Dan has mentioned some brilliant points, and I was making actually my notes of what kind of tips and tricks I can contribute to the conversation, but he was able to articulate it so well. For me, one of the challenges, to be very honest, is the fact that we're, from planning perspective, we are not selling our story in the best possible way to senior stakeholders. I found that, and I made myself that mistake so many times, of going into discussions with senior leadership and talking about performance and service levels and abandonment rate, and they don't care. I mean, it's probably they are interested in understanding that, but I think what we need to understand from planning perspective is that we need to adjust our story to how it would make sense to what group of people. And believe me, when you try to make the exercise of actually talking about financial gain or financial loss and how that performance actually ties to the cost of new employees, if you have to train them, and by the time that they start, how many customers you would have lost and what would be the financial impact, it's much different story than purely saying, well, our service level is going to be 70%. Okay. And so that's one thing that I see as an internal struggle. The other thing that I see is that, and Dan mentioned and touched on this, is that we're not paying and spending too much time speaking to our agents. We are kind of working in our spreadsheets and we are, okay, we're doing our best. This is what the numbers are telling us. It's good enough and people should follow it. So probably my tip for everyone who is a planner, for contact center leaders to talk to their planners, is make a survey, make an anonymous employee survey and see how the employees are really feeling about the process. And not everyone will be happy, but if the majority is happy, that means that you're doing something right. If the majority is unhappy, that means that you're heading to attrition. That means that the financial loss will be so heavy that you're probably going to be struggling for many, many months, if not years. So make an employee survey, follow up on that, and as I mentioned, be as transparent as possible. And I have found out that when you're honest with people and when you're explaining them why do you need them, yes, it's not that you would be able to do everything for them at all times, but they're much more willing to be participants in the journey with you and in the process, rather than purely telling them and directing them, this is what you have to do it, and them not understanding.
I would throw in as well, I think, and this is one of the founding tenets of WFM Labs, is as an industry, we have to own up as well. And I think it's imperative for us to start bringing a new mindset, right? I think, again, a lot of this, hey, you got to meet the service level, you got to get your forecast spot on, you got to make people sit in a seat at a certain time, is all just legacy, right? It's the way we've always done it. It's the way, I was trained, the person before me was trained. So one of the reasons we do what we're doing in WFM Labs and we're having conversations like this is so that folks within the industry can recognize you serve as a linchpin for those kind of conversations. So Dan, I feel like, most of the folks that we've spoken with on the panel so far are in agreement for a balanced approach. Let me ask you, do you have a vision? Do you have a definition? Is there a set of metrics that you would change when you define balanced approach and you get the old elevator speech, right? What does that sound like? How do you define that? and how do you measure it? And when can we come back to Dan and say, did you get what you wanted? And we see that smile on your face and you go, yes, we're finally balanced. What does that look like?
We'll never be balanced.
Okay. All right.
We'll never be balanced, because it's like you asked me today and I'm like, yep, I'm a director of WFM for this organization, and we hit it. That answer is true for that day and has no relevance tomorrow or a week from then or a month from then or a year from then. That balance is constantly shifting, because for me, the balance isn't my agents are at 80% engaged, my service levels are at 85%, my profitability is at least a 10% margin, right? Like, there's not these hard numbers that say balanced, reached. I think it's seasonal. I think it is dependent upon the environment, right? So if the organization's wanting to go through some sort of merger and acquisition, the EBITDA is going to have to be probably a higher priority. We're going to have to focus on making sure the organization looks profitable, that is strong organization. And so for balanced in that environment means, we were running at 10%, and we need to increase that up to 20%. That's what balance looks like for the health of that organization at that time. Other points, it might mean bringing that down to single digit EBITDA, because the employee engagement is so priority, because we want to go after best place to work. We want to go after some awards, recognitions. We want to make sure that our people are investing in the community. And the only way for them to do that is to have more time off. Whatever those values are going to change quarter, yearly, decade. What we need to do now to make sure that all stakeholders, the business, the customer, and the employees, are satisfied and engaged and are providing what we need for them is going to look very different. So my vision is that we're never done. My vision, even in a world where AI is doing a bunch of our job, we still have a place and a value to make sure that all of these stakeholders, all of these people, are still being addressed and cared for and invested in. Sometimes that means over-investing in the business. Sometimes that means over-investing in the customer. So that's honestly where I see ourselves going. This is an ongoing conversation. I don't think it will ever be done. And for me, what's always fun is that every conversation I have with someone looks different. Amazing. I love what you're doing for your employees. That's so cool. Why aren't you talking about the profitability? Like, why aren't you investing more in your organization? Oh my God, your customer experience is the best. When was the last time you surveyed your employees? So that's for me the ongoing conversation. It's constantly going to be refining and refining and refining. I think back to Simon Sinek's Infinite Game, right? It is the goal to just be in the game for as long as possible. And so for me, balance means as soon as we think we're done, we are, and we're going to be closing the door soon.
So it's really about managing that tension. I think it's giving folks the tools to walk that tight wire day in and day out, if I'm hearing you right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. So I know we've got a few more minutes. We wanted to leave a little bit of opportunity for folks to pose questions. Before we do that, I'm going to ask Ted and Irina, any final thoughts before we turn it over to the folks to pepper Dan with questions?
I just have one more for Dan. And if anyone has a question, they're welcome to come off mute, or you can type it in the chat as well for Dan or for any of us. Really, Dan's on the stage here. But Dan, we don't want to go down the road of AI, but still I want to ask.
Sure.
It's coming. Any thoughts on balancing everything that we're used to balancing with, AI coming in, and particularly AI advancing to a point where it's doing a lot more of the thinking? Anything that we need to think about balancing now that there are going to be intelligent bots in the mix with things, with agents as well, or any thoughts on that?
For me, when it comes to the AI conversation, I still want to take a people-centric approach. And so when we're thinking about leveraging AI, what I want to leverage, like around customer experience, say like natural language processing, I'm really excited about sentiment analysis. I'm really excited about real-time coaching for the agents as the call is happening, that there's a bot that is saying, hey, how about this? Hey, how about that? Maybe try this, maybe try that, right? I'm excited because what we're getting to is the customer is getting a more personalized experience. They feel seen, they feel known. All of us want that. So from a customer, AI is adding value. From the employee, they're getting real-time coaching. And I'm really interested. I haven't heard too many people talking about this, but I'm very curious to hear about like real-time burnout. In the same way that we're listening and natural language processing what the customer is feeling, I'm really interested to understand how can we, as an RTA team, for example, be monitoring not just the queue depth, not just the service levels, but also our employee burnouts real time. Who's struggling? What's going on? How can we help give them breaks? Because the AI is saying, oh my God, Jim, 3 calls in a row has taken a really frustrated tone. I think he's having a bad day. Like, I'm excited about that. For me, ultimately, still the same idea, though. Still balance around employees, customer, and business, and it's around people-centered approach. Just AI, I think, will help us get that done even more efficiently.
Perfectly said. I agree with you 100% on that. Let's
Awesome.
leverage the technology to maintain human touch. So
fantastic.
Great.
Awesome.
We've got a question that popped up. Any thoughts, Dan, on the extent to which AI will reduce customer interactions and or increase different channels of interactions?
So 2 different like channels that I'm not hearing too many people talk about. I think virtual reality will absolutely be a channel. In my old life, I was a WFM director over a cruising agency. Basically, I absolutely see a huge value add of that organization being able to sell the ship, sell the rooms, like to be able to upgrade. Look how small this internal like room with no window is. You don't want this. You want this. And go to another room. It's the virtual reality room. They're kind of walking around the suite being like, isn't this worth $5,000? I think virtual reality would be a new channel. And then another channel, which will be fairly humanless, is AI to AI. I absolutely see an environment where my personal AI assistant is reaching out to the business and is having an interaction with the business AI. I mean, I just saw today, where Google is going with a basically like you don't have to actually make the dial anymore. That Google's phone will make the dial for you, go through the prompting for you, wait on hold for you, then call you back as the consumer, right? So AI is already starting to do some of the heavy lifting. I absolutely see that as a new interaction and a new channel that will be coming up around the reducing customer interactions. No, we are simply going to shift our interactions. We thought, online digital platforms would reduce it, and it didn't. It just increased it. It just shifted a small portion off of voice and a whole lot into chat and email. I think as we go down these other paths, the same thing's going to happen. We're not going to want to have access to businesses less. We're going to want even more interaction. It's just going to look slightly different around VR, around AI, kind of interacting with each other. Thank you for asking that.
So while we wait for any other questions, again, we just pop it up in the chat. Irina, any final thoughts or any final questions for Dan?
I would say I would go probably in a little bit of a different direction, and that's really the best advice I can give to everyone is just challenge tomorrow, challenge absolutely every single process that you're doing, because this is the only road to be better, whether it's in your own journey, in your career, in what you're doing as a planner or as an agent, or whether to find and see new ways how can you be better. So again, I fully subscribe to every comment that was mentioned so far, but nothing good has ever happened by saying the old sentiment of we've always done it this way. Well, if you've always done it this way, maybe it's time to try something new. So that's my last closing argument.
And we do have another question that popped up. In your experiences, how much time do you need to spend to educate others in the org?
Interesting. So how much time do you need to spend
about WFM? About WFM, it just tagged on.
I think that's the wrong question. So I think your goal in asking that question is, how long do I need to talk to them so they understand what WFM is doing? And I guess my direct answer is it's never ending. Just get used to it, right? Like if you are new to the organization, connect WFM to their goals. If you've been there for a while, connect WFM to their goals. Help them see how you can help them If your whole argument and your whole educational format is getting them to buy into the value of WFM, you've missed the point. What you need to simply say is, you have these goals. I can't help you with all of them. You're marketing. Like, I can't do all of the, I can't do half of the creative stuff you're doing. What I can do is, when you're wanting to do a big campaign, I can make sure that it doesn't flop because we don't have the people. Let's talk. How can I help make sure that you're successful? So the question is, or the answer I should say is, you're never done. As soon as you think you've told people what you can do, you probably need to tell them again, because they probably either forgot or they weren't listening.
I cannot stop myself by adding to Dan's comment here, is that understanding WFM is not everyone's job, is our job as planners. This is why we're being paid. So everyone has their own goals and their own things to worry about. So it's absolutely a continuous effort to involve and re-explain absolutely every single aspect and how it impacts the different stakeholders. And especially if you would like to, again, become a little bit more mature in your function or to grow, that's what you will be doing on a daily basis, going around everyone and explaining this impacts this and this and this group in this and this and this way. So absolutely, it's a continuous effort.
Yeah, and if you're going to be rebalancing all the time, Dan, I think you got to have those communication channels just open continuously. I love that concept.
Absolutely. For me, if there's nothing else that people take away, my final words, maybe my final words in all of this is, approach the environment with curiosity, open your ears, build relationships, then try to support, then try to make plans, then try to make projects. If you go out trying to figure out how to fix problems and you don't have the relationships, you haven't properly listened, you didn't come with an open mind, you're doomed to fail. So that would be my advice to everyone. Be curious, listen, build relationships, then WFM.
Awesome. Well, hey, I appreciate everybody joining us today. We know how busy it is out there, so you setting time aside to do this has been awesome for us. A couple things to plug real quick. I want to talk a little bit about what WFM Labs is doing next. If you have an opportunity, join us for the SWPP webinar on the 22nd. You'll see some familiar faces, and Ted and myself will be joined by Larry as well, talking about the human side of AI and automation. I think it aligns very nicely with this conversation. And if you can't catch us there, hopefully you're going to be in Nashville, and you'll see a few of us down there. Dan, I think you'll be there as well. So we want to talk about that. I also want to make a plug for WFM Labs. If you're not already a member, please go check it out. Join up. It's a great resource. We're trying to get the community up and running. We love these types of discussions, and we really want to facilitate those within the community. There's a lot of onus upon us as industry professionals to help raise the voice, like Dan, like Irina, like Ted, right? So there's a lot more there. With that out of the way, Dan, I know you probably have some things coming up, and then Irina, we could talk about what's up next for you.
Yeah, so I would just invite everyone to connect with me and follow me on LinkedIn. I was just telling Irina, I think this morning we were chatting, and I'm like, I have something like almost every single week for the next like month and a half. I am probably the busiest unemployed person I know. So follow me on LinkedIn. I'll put in a plug. I've got an important poll up. So on LinkedIn today, I posted a poll. I typically do a Will Ferrell GIF every Friday. I just hit a 1-year anniversary last Friday. Should I keep it going? So everyone, if you wouldn't mind going over, submitting what you think needs to happen with the Will Ferrell Fridays. And just follow me. I'd love to connect.
Sean says yes. Keep it going. There's your vote. All right. And Irina, what's coming up for you?
Pretty much the same as Dan. It's gonna be very heavy next couple of months with a lot of joining podcasts and a lot of webinars. Actually, Dan and I are meeting again next week for yet another webinar. So I would also invite absolutely everyone to follow me on LinkedIn and to just see my content. And also, I'm planning my own podcast that hopefully will be there in the upcoming 1 or 2 months. So that's pretty much where my head is at the moment.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks to everybody. Ted, are we going to make this available online and put it on the
We are. We'll make this available online. Dan, I want to thank you, and Irina as well, and Jim for hosting us. It's a pleasure to hear from you, Dan.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great
All right.
rest of your day and week.
Thanks,
Thank
y'all.
you.
We'll see you.
Bye-bye.